You'll see the second meeting of President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development.
The Department of Commerce is the Department of Sustainable Development. The department is where trade and technology and environmental policies meet. There is a real confluence here. And where those goals work in harmony towards the prime mission of the department, which is to ensure and enhance the economic opportunity for all of the American people. They work in harmony because we absolutely and unequivocally reject the notion that economic growth and environmental goals are in some way incompatible. The leadership of the President and Vice President on these issues shows the falsity of the zero-sum game approach. We can have both. We can have growth and we can be green, but only by rejecting the false dichotomies and the fragmented debate that have played Americans off against Americans. This administration is clearly about change. And the President has reminded us that we must always make change our ally, that we must reject fear and that we must embrace the opportunity that change brings. I believe that the work of the Council is just that kind of change. It demonstrates the opportunity that policies of sustainable development really offer the region and the nation the hope of the future. As this task force moves ahead, we expect the Department of Commerce to play a pivotal role. NOAA is the one key environmental agency in the department and is a very important agency of the federal government in reference to environmental concerns. Our own efforts here at the Department of Commerce on sustainable development are being led by our wonderful Undersecretary, Jim Baker. Jim understands the challenges we face and how those challenges can be surmounted. Indeed, he has already established the first Office of Sustainable Development in our federal government. It is headed by John Bullard, a former mayor of New Bedford, Massachusetts, who will focus precisely on the issues that we are discussing here today. The Technology Administration and NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, are actively involved in developing leading-edge environmental technology. The Eco-Efficiency Task Force, which I co-chair, is working closely with these agencies in pursuit of practical and broadly applicable green technology. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has been involved in the creation of a green GDP, to the mission of incorporating changes in our environmental quality into our standard measure of economic performance. The International Trade Administration is key to our efforts to create domestic economic growth and have a worldwide environmental impact by selling environmental technologies around the world. As proud as I am of the Department of Commerce's involvement, it's important to remember that this task force is a real team effort. Our successes will be measured by our ability to, in fact, reinvent government and to work across governmental and private sector boundaries. To accomplish that end, the President has assembled in this Council an extraordinarily talented group of people, relentlessly pragmatic and yet united in pursuit of a very important ideal, a prosperous and yet more beautiful and healthy nation. We have been given a tremendous opportunity to make America an even greater nation, and we all look forward to discovering with you new and important means of creating sustainable development, preserving our environment, and constructing an atmosphere for a growing economy.
We're helping to define a new role for the United States in the post-Cold War world. But second, and equally importantly, as we move forward, we are charting a new course for environmental protection. It's a course built on partnership, new approaches, new ways of achieving our environmental objectives. As we move forward, what are some of our guiding principles? First, it's jobs and the environment. This president not only understands that the jobs or the environment mystique is a false choice, but in fact he understands that the exact opposite is true. Well-designed environmental policy is a stimulus to economic growth. That's what the Clean Car Initiative is all about. When we have cities in the United States and indeed around the world that are just saying no to automobile traffic in their streets, then we know that the future of the auto industry is in designing an environmentally sound car. That's what NAFTA is all about. Strong economic growth with strong environmental protections. The two go hand in hand. And of course, that's also what the President's Forest Plan is all about. We're working hard to restore the vibrancy, the fabric of the ancient forest system, but at the same time, we're offering sustainable economic development and sound, secure jobs for the people and the communities of the Pacific Northwest. So jobs and the environment. Second, we're breaking the gridlock. It's time to have our agencies all work together as one team. And in fact, through this 16-month period, that's just what they've been doing. We're moving away from the time when one agency would be warring against another, or indeed, bureaus within a single agency not working together. That's what our ecosystems initiatives are all about. We're pooling our resources, sharing our insights and our strengths and our talents. We're serving each other rather than suing each other for once. And as we break down the barriers that separate us as agencies, we're also breaking down the barriers of the Beltway. We're reaching out to communities around the country. We're working in partnership with the states, with communities, with industry, with the environmental community. We're trying to develop better, more common sense approaches to achieving the environmental goals we all share. That's what our climate challenge is all about. That's what Secretary O'Leary's efforts are all about today here in Washington, together with Carol Browner, bringing together thousands of businesses from around this country to sign up to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve their bottom lines. That's what this effort's all about. That's what Secretary Babbitt's efforts are all about when he says we're going to avoid the train wrecks with preserving species. We can bring industry, the development community together with the environmental community and find ways to allow development to proceed while protecting critical habitats. And that's also what Carol Browner's initiatives on looking at whole industry sectors and her common sense approach, that's what it's about, bringing people together and finding a better way of moving forward. Our third principle, this president recognizes that the peace, the prosperity, the security of the United States depends on a healthy resource base here and throughout the world. So as we're building partnerships here at home, we're also building partnerships around the world with developed countries and developing countries. We're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we're stopping the depletion of the ozone layer, and we're halting the destruction of our forests and the hemorrhaging loss that we're experiencing of biodiversity.
I think in some ways the most important things that are going on at the Interior Department are entirely outside the legislative arena. I think that's true in many areas of this administration. And the reason for that is that during the 1980s, we had in place an administration which was not interested in using environmental laws. And in an odd juxtaposition, the Congress responded by passing more and more laws, as if somehow the grant of more and more authority might wake up the executive branch. Well, when we came in last year, we discovered an extraordinary backlog of very important possibilities. And it's been my experience in most areas that less important than new laws is setting about using the laws we have. Now, the most obvious and I think historically important example of that is the forest plan in the Pacific Northwest. I'm confident that this plan will go down in history as the beginning of one of the really important new chapters in environmental history, because here, for the first time in American history, federal agencies working together have broken the gridlock, not to protect one species, the spotted owl, but to protect hundreds of species, not just in one place, but in 3 states, an entire ecosystem running from Puget Sound down into Northern California in an unprecedented effort in which my agency, the Bureau of Land Management, working hand in hand with Secretary Espy and the United States Forest Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, scores of other agencies, has produced an ecosystem management plan of great complexity, demonstrating the concepts that Katie was talking about, that it is possible for federal agencies not to create gridlock, but to break it. And increasingly to understand that we can't treat environmental problems out on the back 40 in isolation. Everything relates. Someone once said when a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon, it may create a snowstorm in Chicago. That's the concept that underlies this increasing understanding that there aren't any empty spaces anymore, and we can't go at it one crisis at a time. We must move this across the entire landscape. Just a couple more brief examples. The Florida legislature in Tallahassee last week passed an extraordinary piece of legislation which in turn derives directly from the litigation that together with EPA and other agencies we settled last summer. It's a recognition that the Everglades National Park is dying. It's not dying because of the park rangers or any lack of effort on their part. It's because of what's happening beyond the park boundary, clear up north across the Everglades agricultural area, Lake Okeechobee, in the Kissimmee River Basin extending clear up to Orlando. And it reflects, again, a concept which this administration brings to landscape management and environmental laws for the first time in history. It says you can't save the Everglades inside the park. You can save it only by dealing with the entire ecosystem. Scores of federal agencies, the government of Florida, the South Florida Water Management District. If you want to save the Everglades, you've got to deal with the issues of urban expansion on the outskirts of Miami, with agriculture, with fishing in Florida Bay. And in a sense, you have to scale up, bring people together, cast away those old jurisdictional rivalries and saying we are operating in unison across an entire landscape. For those of you who are interested in California, there's another wonderful example going on in the Bay Delta of California. That's an issue which has been gridlocked since the days of Governor Jerry Brown clear back in the 1970s. It is now moving under the leadership of EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation toward, I think, the possibilities of a productive result extending all the way from San Francisco Bay up the San Joaquin and Sacramento rivers. Grazing is another contentious issue that I think illustrates much of the same. We've gone back together with the Forest Service across the entire western landscape and said we're going to have to break this old paradigm of command and control, adversarial regulation, because if we're ever going to have a meaningful say in how 600-700 million acres of land are administered, we're going to have to get back into those communities, invite everybody to the table, and see if we can find a new paradigm in which all the stakeholders in public lands out there on the landscape are actually involved.